January 1st, 2020. You wake up with a smile. It's a new year. Anything can happen, you say to yourself, not realizing how dreadfully right you are. And then the first domino falls. You pop open Netflix to watch another episode of Friends, only to realize it's gone. Friends is nowhere to be seen, and to this day, you still won't find it on Netflix in the US. But you know who does have it? Japan, and Italy, and Switzerland, and lots of other countries, actually. Which is why you, my friend, need to try NordVPN. With this bad boy, you can route your connection through a remote server and access content that may be censored in your country, meaning you'll have unrestricted access and your money's worth to the full library of your favorite streaming service. Nord also protects your internet traffic from being visible to your provider, unlike incognito mode, and also encrypts your data to keep you safe from cybercriminals and other nefarious third parties. If you want to learn more about how VPNs actually work, check out this link in the description, and if you'd like to give NordVPN a go, use my link in the description, nordvpn.com/DarylTG, or use code DarylTG for 68% off a 2-year plan, plus 1 additional month for free. Nord has also told me to inform you that this is totally risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee, so why not go give it a try? A genuine appreciate you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video because, as a poet once said, roses are red, violets are blue. People don't think making money on YouTube be like it is, but it do. NordVPN.com/DarylTG. Aight, let's get it. This is you. You aren't okay. You've been struggling to beat one of these 3 bosses for a solid hour and a half. Your hands are trembling more than a chihuahua on a roller coaster in the winter. Your eyes are dilated AF. You have enough caffeine and adrenaline running through your body to power a small alarm clock. You feel a deep anger akin to the time your dad sent you to your room as a kid because you don't have a dad. You're furious, you're exhausted, and every time you make progress on this absolute stain on the face of what you thought was a great game, you lose your rhythm and you die again. So you quit. You let go. You go brood for a few minutes, a few hours, or maybe even a whole day, and just accept defeat. But then it happens. You draw a mental line in the sand, and your inner shonen protagonist comes out full speed. And in a blaze of glory, you grab your controller, you take a deep seat, and prepare for several more hours of inventing new curse word combinations and almost controller throws, and as your heart begins to pound with righteous fury, and your hands begin to steady like those of a seasoned surgeon, you somehow beat it. Like, kinda easily, after, 2 tries.
Huh. Maybe it's not my fault Dad left.
Alright, so let me be clear. What I just described has probably not happened to all gamers, at least to that precise of a degree. Maybe for some folks it may take more than 2 tries, maybe for some it needs to be a full night's sleep, but I still feel like there is a tendency here for a simple break after a defeat to give us a sudden boost in our abilities, almost like how Saiyans get that big buff after taking a beating. But I only feel this way because it has happened to me, which is why I was incredibly hesitant to make this video at all, until I asked if anyone else had experienced this exact same thing in one of my YouTube stories, and sure enough, a lot of people had. So being the opportunistic content creator I am, I thought, let's not do that video and instead just play Genshin Impact for a month. But then I remembered one day I'd like to do YouTube for a living, I'd better put out a new video. And so here we are, and here I am trying to answer why this happens. Why did taking a simple 2-hour break from trying to beat Nosk make him a pushover when I came back to him? Why was 8 hours of attempts on Dr. Call's robot and Cuphead not enough for Fretful Gaze to get a W, but after some sleep, only took 1 try? Raven Stormcliffe and John Enoch Jr. had similar experiences in Undertale. Sacred Yavatal ran into the same thing in Monster Hunter. People experience this a ton in the Souls games, and I would love to hear your stories in the comments. But why on earth does this happen? Why does taking the most gruesome of L's followed by the most dope of naps give us this sudden edge when we return to that hellish boss or vexingly long level? And after doing some research and exerting a lot of self-control, I think I've arrived at an answer. And that answer is there is a mismatch that takes place when we first tackle that difficult boss or level. What's not matching? We'll get to that. But for now, let's talk about tantrums. Try to remember back to a time you can't even remember. You're this many years old, you've just downloaded the walking DLC for your legs, and some might call you a toddler. And since you're now a baby on the move, this little thing called the playpen is in your life to keep you out of trouble. And you had that one toy turtle that was just so damn fun to throw over the edge of the playpen that you'd do it all the time. You'd throw it, cry because you can't reach it, and then because your dad couldn't hear the Raiders game over your wailing, he would grab it and give it back to you. Then you'd throw it and cry and he would give it back, then you'd throw it and cry and he would give it back, and before you know it, your poor dad has conditioned you to believe that crying gets your turtly-wordly returned to you. He has reinforced your crying in a textbook case of operant conditioning. He has encouraged the very thing he was trying to stop. Probably why he left. But then your mother, being the absolute treasure that she is, steps in and says, "Hey, honey, you're teaching this little maniac to do that. You have to ignore the crying." And after some back and forth, they let you cry and they don't give the toy back. You cry and it doesn't work. You cry more and it doesn't work. You get incredibly worked up, veins are popping out, the Raiders just fumbled, and you cry until it reaches a peak, and eventually, if your parents were disciplined, you would stop because crying was no longer getting the job done and you were exhausted. And what you experienced in that moment at the most basic level was extinction. No, not that extinction, this extinction. You were no longer being rewarded for your behavior, so you eventually broke the association between your behavior and that reinforcement. B.F. Skinner is sort of the father of operant conditioning, which is why you'll often hear some gameplay loops described as Skinner boxes. And according to some of his work in the 50s with lab rats, if you train a rat that hitting a switch produces a pellet, and then later just stop giving pellets, that rat will frantically hit the switch over and over, desperately trying to get the pellet to come out until it gives up. The learned behavior is now extinct, and the frantic tantrum at the end just before the extinction is called an extinction burst. This is what happens to you when a vending machine takes your money but doesn't give you the Sprite, so you hit the button over and over, getting angrier and angrier. When you cry more because crying isn't getting you your way, or when you click X like a madman because the window just won't close, or when regardless of how well you're playing, you aren't being rewarded with a win. The Switch isn't giving you a treat. When that absurd level in Meat Boy or Celeste isn't yielding ample pogs, you get frustrated, obviously, but the longer you play without getting that steady reinforcement, the more likely you are to waste time on frustrated attempts that just kinda wear you out and eventually get you to quit. And studies like this one back in 2001 have found that when angry, people tend to engage in a little bit more risky business and take dangerous chances more often. When Orenstein and Smo are getting the better of you and you're spiraling out, slowly but surely you're throwing a tantrum. In the simplest of terms, our poor primate noggins are burning out. Now, to pump the brakes here and poke a hole in my argument, by this logic, anytime you don't win in a game, you should just instantly rage quit, right? You should spiral out of control and just become a child anytime you get outwaltzed by a primal aspid. Well, I may have done that, but not everyone is me. You see, in 57, Fester and Skinner tested extinction in lab rats against different reinforcement schedules. And you would probably rage quit instantly if you had never lost to that aspid and then suddenly came across one that was just set at like a Bruce Lee difficulty. In that case, 1 or 2 losses may send you into a spiral, but since by nature games like these are based on skill, you won't win every single time. But as you learn and improve, you will pick up wins just on a much less regular basis, on a more variable basis. And when Skinner and Furster rewarded rats on a variable schedule like this, it was a much slower process for them to experience extinction, let alone a burst. And thanks to that variable reinforcement schedule, we typically won't rage quit or have a burst until we hit a major difficulty spike and the wins suddenly stop. The lesson here is don't buy your kids toys for everything they do right. Reward them every now and then to keep them doing what you ask. Alright, now on to the mismatch. In sports psychology, there is a concept known as the YERKES-DODSON law, sometimes called the individual zones of optimal functioning, IZOV if you prefer. The idea comes from a 100-year-old study by Robert Yerkes and John Dodson. In their study, they found that if you give a mouse a moderate shock— my god, we are really fucking with all the mice in this episode. If you give a mouse a moderate electrical shock, it will typically find the end of a maze much faster than if you give it a massive shock or no shock at all. Now, obviously, this study being done in 1908 means the results could be disputed, but interestingly enough, the findings of YERKES and DODSON have actually been replicated over the years in cats, other rats, and people. And it essentially boils down to the idea that when presented with any given task, there is an optimum level of stimulation, intensity, anxiety, vigor, stress, level of triggered, whatever you'd like to call it, that fits best. In fact, research behind this is so well backed that in 2016, the Harvard Business Review released an article all about it, asking if you're too stressed or not stressed enough at work. Again, the idea being that if you aren't stressed enough, you simply aren't invested, and if you're too stressed, you won't be efficient at your job. So when you're fighting the Blazing Bull in Sekiro, you should be just stressed enough, right? Well, yes, but how much is just enough? According to the eyes-off model, it depends entirely on what you're doing. Putting in golf, for example, probably needs to be about a 3 or 4 on the Tyler 1 scale. Playing linebacker, closer to an 8 or 9. Where does top-level Counter-Strike play or beating Boomer Kuwanger lay on that scale? Tough to say, but I'd be willing to bet closer to 3 or 4, and here's why. What I didn't tell you about the YERKES-DODSON law is that they only got this lovely U-shaped graph when the task was complex, like a maze. But if it's a simple task, like go through the correct door, the highest level of stress was fastest and gave more of a linear curve. Complex tasks that require calculation, understanding, reasoning, timing, etc. will typically require a more moderate to lower level of stimulation. In a 1994 study, they split 100 subjects into 5 groups early in the morning and gave them one of 5 levels of caffeine dosage, 1 being no caffeine, 5 being twitchy from hoodwinked. And on simple tasks, the more caffeine subjects had, the better they performed. But on the more complex tasks, the lower caffeine level subjects outperformed the higher level subjects. Which is why being tilted or overly amped up does not promote the ability to perform the complex dodging, blocking, and timing of attacks that these big boy major league bosses and levels are asking you to do. You may not have noticed this, but big to late game feats are complex tasks. The amount of information you have to begin to understand and then act upon accordingly and then do all over again when the second phase of the fight begins is actually pretty taxing. The difficulty is not from the fact that you're fighting a giant, disgusting thing, is that you have to understand how to dodge, when to attack, when to heal, and do that rapidly with as few mistakes as possible. Which is why I think it's so common we use the phrase learning the boss or learning the level. There is an understanding that you must spend some time figuring out how to take this thing down, but when you keep on dying and aren't really getting rewarded with a win, that mini extinction burst grows closer and closer. You feel like you're learning, and you are, then you get really far into that fight, then suddenly your efforts haven't gotten you that far in quite a few tries, and now you're beginning to fume. Now your heart rate is going up, now your nose won't stop itching at really important parts of the level, now you're making dumb mistakes, now you're angry at your dad again, now you're wasting attempts because you just want to try again immediately, now you remember that one time in high school when you fist bumped your crush's high five, now your fingers are beginning to hurt, now you forgot to change your charms at the bench, now you're considering just looking up the ending on YouTube, now you just think that— Have you checked in with your level of stimulation lately? Where are you on the Tyler 1 scale? You should be here. You see, folks, this is the mismatch, and this is why taking a break is S tier. Learning a pattern to a complex task takes time. Learning a boss takes dying a few times, but in the meantime, while we're being educated, that variable reinforcement schedule goes out the window. We aren't being rewarded for our efforts anymore. The wins stop, and slowly but surely we inch towards that extinction burst, and we quit. But when you get tilted like this and experience something akin to an extinction burst, it doesn't stop your mind from chewing on the challenge. The muscle memory still gets in, the patterns still get in, and your power level goes up. So when you take that nap and return to Cuphead, you begin with a lower level of vigor, a more reasonable level of stress, an optimal level of stimulation. Only now, you have the necessary skill to rise to the occasion and make your mama proud. Then suddenly on that first or second try, you're like,
wait! My brain is working!
Alright, before I end this, I do want to say, obviously not everyone is like this. Some folks just have ice in their veins and never rage quit. They just learn and plow right on through, which I have nothing but admiration for. Some folks, however, just have a higher trait level of anxiety. There's this scale in psychology called the Big Five personality traits, and if you score low in agreeableness and high in something called energetic arousal, you're probably going to be predisposed to a shorter fuse, and I'd guess more rage quits. But I won't dive too deep into this. Personality is actually the field of psych I know the least about. But if you guys want a video on how personality affects anything gaming, let me know and I'll dive into that ball pit for you. The real lesson to help yourself get good is give yourself credit for little things. Progress in a boss fight should be a win for you. Dying is okay. Seek to learn, not win just yet in the early going. That will help keep the rage away. Check in with yourself often to make sure you're feeling a solid 3 or 4, whatever number keeps you level. And above all, man, just don't be afraid to go take a break. Howdy folks, thank you so much as always for being here and for watching my dumb video. I truly hope you got a kick out of it, learned something, laughed, or at least did the little thing where you just smile and shoot some air through your nostrils. You know, the... As always, a massive thank you to my spectacular Patreon supporters, especially this month's featured patrons, Spencer Saunier, Double One, Uberanzi, Aaron Lucen, Coco Clems, Trisha Grenier, and Caleb D. If you'd like to become a future featured patron, grab some bonus content or early access to new vids, head on over to my Patreon, link on screen. Go give NordVPN a try, follow your boy on Twitter, like the video, share the video, and as always, have yourself a damn good one.